we're constantly being put in smaller and smaller boxes, with the colouring in department. We just create a bit of content. Well, that's not the right way to think about it. We drive growth, that's what marketing's about. That's what advertising helps to do. So we should be able to talk about what we do, articulate it.
With pride.
And to tell people about it, Because how do we operate if we don't?
Hello and welcome back to the Courageous Leaders podcast, brought to you by the Change Creators, where we strengthen leadership teams, creating environments where people and profits can grow together. I'm your host, Joanna Howes, and on today's episode we have the brilliant Orlando Wood, Chief Innovation Officer of System One and creator of Advertising Principles Explained. Orlando is transforming marketing's understanding of advertising effectiveness. Through his research blending science, art and advertising wisdom, he challenges the industry to prioritise entertainment and human connection over data-driven tactics. He is also the author of Lemon and Lookout and an honorary fellow of the IPA. So let's get started. Orlando, welcome to the show. I am very excited for this conversation.
Lovely to be here, Jo. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm going to go straight in,
Yep.
which I warned you we would.
Yep.
What has been a courageous moment for you?
Well, I suppose the courageous moment for me, there have been a few, but was Lemon, the launch of my book, Lemon, back in 2019 with the IPA. And it was quite, when I think back at it now, I think, that first line, the cover, of course, but the first line, this advertising brain has stopped working properly. It's quite a bold thing to say, isn't it?
Were you worried about upsetting anyone?
A little bit. As with any creative project, if you've got that feeling of sort of fear and excitement, they're quite psychologically close, aren't they? Those two things. I think that's a good sign, So yes, I was a bit anxious, but no, it was, it's a fantastic reception. So, I was absolutely delighted.
It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
But I want to know, where did the idea come from? Like, were you just getting frustrated with the work you were seeing or the conversations you were having?
All of that. I'd been doing quite a lot of work with the IPA, and I'd done some work the year before looking at characters in advertising and why they'd disappeared. And, I couldn't really explain why this was. And, Peter Field had been doing a lot of work at the same time about how creative effectiveness had been falling, this dangerous sort of place that marketing was finding itself and switching budgets towards performance. Anyway, I had read this book, been introduced to this book by Iain McGilchrist, fantastic thinker, brilliant neuropsychologist, who talks about the brain, the two hemispheres of the brain. And he talks about the different modes of attention associated with those two halves of the brain, one being broad and open and one being very narrow. That's the left hemisphere, very targeted, very close up and grasping. Whereas the right hemisphere is very broad, wide and interested in the world, and always on. Anyway, I was looking at his work. I was watching television one evening and looking at these ads, and they were very close up, very rhythmic, I thought, hang on a minute. I put two and two together. I put the sort of Iain McGilchrist observation about types of attention and the left hemisphere being not very good with people and very close up and, all those things, very rhythmic. And the right hemisphere being about understanding narrative and metaphor and humour and all of those things. And all those things seem to have been disappearing from advertising, And I sort of saw those two modes of attention. I saw what was happening in advertising. I thought, hang on, there's something going on here. And the more I looked into it and that I did the research, I found, true enough, there had been this shift in advertising style in the digital world towards this mechanistic, up close, quite rigid, kind of almost coercive, telling people what to do, and that was really the beginning of the book idea. And so I then went, I talked to the IPA about it. They were very enthusiastic. And then I went to speak to Adrian Holmes. So Adrian Holmes is this fantastic creative director. You probably know him from The Water in Mallorca. Doesn't taste like what it oughta. And I was telling him about the book, what I was planning to write about, what it's all about, showing him the images, because of course there's a lot of art in the book as well, and trying to show what I mean by narrative versus, sort of abstraction. And I said, Adrian, have you got any ideas on the name for this book? Because I can't come up with a list of terrible names for this thing. I ran through them, and he was, no. And we were having lunch. We were having lunch at a pub, and anyway, he said, yes, the brain. It's a bit like a lemon, isn't it? And then he said, just quick as that, lemon. How the advertising brain turns sour, and that was, I felt something.
You could feel it. Yeah.
Oh God, that's great,
Yeah.
but scary, And then eventually he wrote the copy on the front cover, which is, a really wonderful copy.
For those watching, I'm just going to hold that to camera so you see. It's
that's
absolutely
great.
beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a wonderful cover, and he does such a wonderful job. All based on the VW Lemon ad, of course, from the 1960s, the Creative Revolution. So it was referencing other great advertising. Yeah. And as I said, the advertising brain stopped working properly. Perhaps maybe this is the repair manual he writes, at the end, referencing the VW thing again, cars and so on. Brilliant, I remember saying to him, Adrian, I'm not sure about this, that. He said, Orlando, do you want to sell this book or not? And I said, well, yes, yeah, okay. Well, and it was always like that, And anyway, so I took it to the IPA, and there were some nerves about this front cover. What is it, an ad? What is it? Can we make it sort of? Can we just put our F-Works livery on the front, and then put that as almost like an ad on the inside cover? And I said, guys, this is, we've got one of the greatest creative directors, working today, who created this for us. Let's put it on the front cover. And they did go for it, Brilliant. And I'm so pleased, they did. And I think the cover and the title is such an important part of what the book is. It's a statement. It's like Bernbach said, with anything in life, whether you're a person, whether you're a product, whether you're, a company, you've got to project a personality.
Yes. There's got to be something about you.
Yeah, there's got to be something about you, hasn't there? And that, that really sort of, and you can judge a book by its cover, I think, in this case. And that was a wonderful thing,
And it's good because it's like the courage to do the book in the first place, the courage to put yourself out there, and the courage to do something that's a bit different.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the courage to put a statement out there that could create a bit of, well, hang on a minute, are you criticising us?
And it was provocative.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things, I've learned, is you've got to be a little bit provocative sometimes. So that was, I think, a pretty courageous
It's very courageous. Yeah. And it's interesting thinking about the IPA in terms of, not just the IPA, all of us as humans, that maybe, is it the left side of the brain that brings that caution of,
very much so.
Can we just protect ourselves a bit here?
Yeah, exactly. So the left hemisphere likes things to be fixed and unchanging, and it's not very good with ambiguity. It's not very good with risk. It likes things to stay the same and be predictable and no surprises, that sort of thing. That's just some of the features of, the left hemisphere. And it's, but unfortunately, the thing is, if you keep doing that, then no one's going to notice you, And if you only do that, and that's one of the problems I think we've got today, is that everything is overly sort of managed and there's a lot of caution, that you don't get to something that hasn't already been seen.
Yeah.
And novelty is one of the things that the right hemisphere is alert to. That's what it does. It's making sure that, we don't become someone else's lunch. That's the sort of right hemisphere is partly about that and social bonding. And it's open to novelty and metaphor, contradiction, novelty, narrative, all of those things, people, understanding people, empathy, all of that kind of thing. And I suppose it was, when I wrote it, it's only come to me recently, really, I suppose, but I'd lost my dad the year before. And, a wonderful man, in retrospect, very right-brained as I would see it, very funny, very curious, just wonderful. And I was kind of going through that loss, that sense of loss the year before that, which was quite, it's really intense, actually, and as I know you know. Lemon, really, when you think about it, is about loss, isn't it? It's a loss of something that's important, loss of humanity in advertising, a sense of loss.
Yeah.
And I suppose I was kind of in some ways channeling some of that. There's an interesting piece of a study that Ian McGilchrist talks about. He says that there was this statistician who looked at the output of Mozart, Beethoven and Liszt, and looked at their letters, and looked at something like 1,400 letters that they'd written in their lifetimes. And what this statistician found was, because they looked at, using linguistic analysis, moments during their lives, sort of mapped their lives against emotional moments, sadness, grief, joy, love, all these sorts of things. And what the statistician found was that there was immediately after, it wasn't during periods of sadness, it was particularly sadness, but afterwards you get, almost like when you're in remission, you get huge levels of creativity emerging, And I mean, I'm not saying that's what this is, but I kind of am in a way, because it was almost there's a lot of my dad in the book, there's a lot of me in the book, and you have got to put something of yourself into things, haven't you, if you're creating anything.
But it's you.
It's you.
It's your
we
words.
go back to projecting a personality. So that it was that following year, and I think it was almost like a tribute to my dad in many ways. So
was it therapeutic?
It was. It was. Yeah. I mean, I got through the really sharp end of the grief by that point, but it was a lovely thing to do, to write.
If you're enjoying this episode and finding it insightful, I want to take a moment and remind you, if you haven't already, to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It's a small action, but it makes a big difference. Not only will you be the first to know when an episode drops, but it really helps us to continue to create this content for leaders like you. And I'd love to hear from you. So if you've got thoughts, questions or ideas, feel free to drop them in the comments. Also, if you want to explore how my leadership training and coaching can support you and your team, then drop me a DM and we can have a call. Thanks so much. Now let's get back to the episode. And just curious, thank you for sharing about your father.
Yeah, not at all.
How did you feel, going through grief? How has that changed you in terms of your left, right brain emotions? What's evolved?
Yeah, well, I think I'm more sensitive to situations, I think. It's almost like heightens your empathy a bit. So you can be never used to cry at films, and I don't really cry at films anymore, but I'm more susceptible to it, to welling up. I think until you've been through something like that, you can't really understand it. Literally a piece of you dies, and that's really hard, really hard. But it does sort of, I found, speaking autobiographically, that it made me sort of more empathetic in some ways, and understanding of situations, that I couldn't have understood before.
And I don't know about you, so personally, I think it helped me to see the world a bit differently.
Yeah.
Not straight away, but there's certain things, and I know for some people in my life, they're like, how does that not bother you?
Yeah.
Why don't you get angry about that? Because I'm just like, it's just not, so many things now, I just go, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, a different sense of
perspective
perspective in a way, isn't it? And I think you relate to people around you differently as well, So I think that it is instructive, and it does change you. I mean, it forever changes you.
Forever. And it's interesting, I think even, I don't know if there's enough spoken about grief in the workplace or in leadership for people to really understand it and feel comfortable talking about it.
That's right. I mean, I wrote poetry. I mean, this is doggerel, but and the right hemisphere is very good with poetry and sadness, but also, I mean, it is. It's not a trope, but it's true. Creativity, comes from the right hemisphere. It was. You've got to get it out somehow, haven't you? And it was sort of these fragments of memories. I remember sort of watching Bagpuss with him when I was little, and he would read, Alice in Wonderland to me. The walrus and the carpenter and all those things. The time has come. The walrus said. It was these sorts of things that I just sort of I wrote about 3 poems, but it was that helps to get it out, because it's the right hemisphere really is the thing that really is sensitive to all of that. And poetry, as opposed to prose, poetry is one of the things, like music is one of the things the right hemisphere is very, very, attuned to, should we say.
I can imagine it being quite calming.
Yes,
to write poetry.
You've got to get it out there. It feels like you've got to get it out, and I wanted to get it out. So that was.
And talking about getting it out, thinking about, for leaders listening to this and help people listening to it. If people are going, and people go through different ways of dealing with grief, but we need to learn to talk about it, because just ask someone, how are you? And be comfortable to sit in that conversation. So I used to remember so often, I would want to talk about my dad. I would want to share the memories. And the minute I start talking about him, people are like, oh, and they're uncomfortable. I don't know. This is actually joyous for me to remember him, tell you these memories.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can we get more comfortable in the workplace of just being in that grief? And if someone's going through that grief, not going, I won't call them or be there because I don't know what to say.
Yeah, and I think I think that is, and this is what I was, until you've been through it, it's quite difficult to know quite how to respond to someone who's going through it, because you're nervous about saying the wrong thing or getting it wrong in some way,
Funny though, it's something we all die.
Yeah,
we all know we're going to die, yet we are so worried about how we talk about it.
Well, the left hemisphere is not very good with death. It's quite a change in circumstance.
So what doesn't? So because it's the change.
I think it's because it doesn't like to deal with it. So it can't really deal with it.
So just put the brave face on, keep going, brush over it, move forward.
Yeah, no. So you've got So absolutely.
Would you say initially you're more left or right brain thinking naturally?
Good question. I think we all have obviously both. And I think it partly depends on what you're doing. I think there was a period in my career, when I was largely doing quantitative research, where sort of the left hemisphere definitely came to the fore, But then there are a bit, other times when it's the other, and. I'd like to think I'm kind of a bridge between the left hemisphere of commerce and business and profit and sales and all those things, and the right hemisphere of creativity that opens people up to possibility, and trying to explain the link, but why they're both important and how they support each other. Yeah. So I think in my work I try to express things through art. And to show people what I mean, when I'm talking, and to show the work as well. I think I'd say I'm pretty attuned to the right hemisphere. I play piano, I paint as well, which is very very rewarding, very helpful. Yeah. I think you've got to do both in life, haven't you? We're both things. And I think what I'd say is, when you're creating anything, you've got to have this, first of all, this divergent attention that you're open to things. You're in open mode. It's a time when anything could happen. Anything. Your serendipity. You've got to be open to serendipity. So you read things, you look broadly. You're looking for clues. Anything could be a clue, or help you in some way. And then there does come a point where you've got to close things down. The left hemisphere comes in, and you've got to be a bit more certain. But it's often about looking at things in parallel. Reading things in parallel, and your brain starts to find connections or links between things that help you then to create a new whole. And that's what creativity is. It's the bringing into being of a new whole. Is what it is. Yeah. How Ian McGilchrist describes it, and that does require a period of just sort of sitting on things, letting things percolate a bit, and eventually something comes out,
Yeah, and I think it's that relationship between the uncertainty and the certainty.
Yes.
And those two things is how can choose that your relationship with those.
Yeah.
Do you have any hacks for the brain in terms of, I know I'm naturally more left brain.
Do you think you are?
Definitely way more left brain. Analysing, overthinking, all of that. And then I'm definitely, even listening to you, I'm inspired going, I need to do more activities that inspire my right. Because I think my right's got a bit lazy.
Yeah, okay.
And my left is definitely overworked. It's used way too much. Are there any brain? And I think one of the reasons is because of my relationship with uncertainty. I do like to I like to know where I'm at. I like a plan and have that. Are there any hacks to help the left brain go, all right brain, I'm going to give you a chance. You can have a go. Okay. You can take over for a bit.
Yeah, good question. I mean, there are things like mindfulness, that help you to be more kind of present in. I mean, the right hemisphere is about presenting the world to us in the first place. It's about being present in the world, The left hemisphere likes to map things, create a two-dimensional sort of flat map, that represents things. But the maps are very helpful, but they don't. But they're not the world, So the right hemisphere is about being in the world. Obviously, spontaneity might be one way of just sometimes just go with it, Joe.
Let's just get in the car and see where we end up.
So yeah, I think that it's an interesting one. I think there's a book I was reading recently that was all about the brain and how flexible it keeps you, and that just some of these activities like art or going to a concert and just one of those, they claimed in a scientific study that one of these a month was enough to extend your life by 10 years. So I know it's crazy, isn't it? But that's it seems worthwhile to me.
I think I'm going to book some tickets.
So I think it's definitely worth trying.
So in terms of then looking at this lens through leadership, what are you noticing with the leaders that you're in, leading yourself, in terms of how important it is that we can connect to this emotional side through leadership?
Well, it's hugely important. A business is a creative endeavor at the end of the day. You come up with a brand, you come up with a name, you come up with a product. You have to think about how you're going to sell it. It requires great ingenuity.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think in a lot of businesses, it becomes the business of managing an operation, rather than thinking about how do we make this idea bigger? How do we make it? How do we amplify this some way? And so you get. I think today, in particular, it feels a bit like we're in a period of stasis, and nervousness about things, and a desire to overly manage and cascade things through several hierarchies of business, and it's funny enough, in the 1950s, where it was very similar in many ways to today. It was a decade of bigness, of scale, of efficiency, and the science. Everyone was trying to rebuild after the Second World War, so it was all about production and time and motion studies and all of that sort of thing. And so it was quite a rigid sort of society, not just in, it was sort of careful and rigid. And there was a book that was written, The Human Side of Enterprise, I think it was called, in 1960, that was hugely influential. And it talked about different types of business, X and Y businesses. And X businesses were characterized as being sort of top-down hierarchy and really sort of believing that the workforce essentially disliked work and didn't really want to be there and had to be coerced, cajoled and pushed, into doing things, And then there were Y businesses that actually sort of treated people with a bit more respect, that believed in self-determination and, giving people some leeway and license to do what they're good at, and more collaborative, if you like. And it was a very influential book, and it was just the right it's that sort of time, when the creative revolution was just about to really come into its own, 60s and everything that happened in the 60s. And I think we're very much in a period of the X business at the moment. I think, and you see the left and the right hemispheres in these two businesses, the types of business, I think, too.
This type of leader you've got.
Yeah.
Do you think AI is going to open it up again to be more human, or do you think we're going to go even more rigid?
It's very interesting, isn't it? It helps in some ways to, prototype, to show people an idea, to get people almost excited about something before you've spent any money on it, and therefore, it can overcome a sense of risk in one way. But, if everything goes through the same AI machines, then we end up in a very samey world, don't we?
Oh, I'm already feeling it. Like, you go on LinkedIn, and I've been testing some stuff.
Have you?
Everything. You go, no, it's all looking the same.
Yeah,
we're all doing the same.
Everyone's doing the same thing.
It's just.
I mean, that's it, isn't it? And as we know in advertising, you've got to do something a bit different. You've got to stand out in some way, and projecting a personality is very important in that. We'll have some sort of aggregated personality, won't we? Or maybe it's told to behave in a certain way, But is that how people won't they see through that?
I'm just worried we're going to stop thinking so much. Because in one way, I think, because I'm not a natural writer, so in one way it's helping me explore writing.
Yeah.
But I'm writing and then I feed it in, and then it makes it better for me, refines it. But there's some tools that I've been introduced to that just write everything for you. I don't even need to write anything. I just have to put like one word in. It's like I've got
it's very worrying, really.
And I'm like, you're stopping me thinking.
Yes.
And then you're stopping my creativity, and it's all looking a bit bland.
Yes. I think you have to think of it as a collaborator, as something that you like a creative partner where you feed an idea in. No, that's not right. Come on, try a bit harder. That's not right. Haven't you thought about doing it this way? And then, so you have to sort of probably work with it rather than just accept the first answer.
But I am keeping an eye on the people that are already getting sick on it to go, right, who's going to be those first people? And I'd love to be that myself, but I'm sitting there going, what do I do? But that are going to go against it and go the other way to say, look, we've got to get that creativity back.
Absolutely.
And we need to own that.
And, just going back to the books for a minute, as I said, and I think David Abbott said something similar, that you've got to put something of yourself into things. And so in my books, I talk about, pieces of music that I did, that I care about, that my dad cared about. That's difficult to fake, I think.
Yeah.
And that is something that you can only really come from within, from your experience of the world, because AI can only live vicariously through other people, through it's not got drunk on a Saturday night. Has it? It doesn't understand. No. It doesn't really understand what it means to live in the world. And anything that lives in time. And time is something that even, the laws of nature have to abide by. And time is important, and anything that matters to us really exists in time and over time. And AI it doesn't live in time.
No. It's almost like poetry. That was beautiful.
Well,
you could take that. I'll send you the transcript. Well, that was a poetry. It's got me thinking how actually it's going to go two ways, and I think it's in a way it's going to encourage more courageous action from humans, because you're going to get the ones where it will encourage some people. It will encourage laziness, because there was so much can be done for you.
Yeah.
But then I think for some people, it's just going to spark this action and courage to be like,
it's
no,
gotta-
let's
do
do
something
more.
else.
Yeah, so I'm going to be quite excited to see what that does. Yeah.
Let's make something that actually is, unique or
And has a point of
original
view.
in the sense that it comes from multiple sources that one person has brought
Yeah.
together to create something,
And the true source.
something new. Yeah.
Because I know also your real passion, you talked about the 1950s, that your course you're doing at the moment
Yes, APE.
is APE, which is absolutely brilliant. Can you talk about where did that come from in you?
Well, I suppose, if Lemon is essentially a story of loss, if Look Out was a story of, I think, probably angst, it was written during COVID. And it's funny, you can't take these like a whirlpool in a river, you can't take these things out of context, really, because they're everything's of the moment, isn't it? We go back to time again, and that collective consciousness. But I suppose APE, I hope, is about hope and opening people up to possibility, and giving people an understanding, a grounding of advertising's past, its history, which actually really helps to clarify what these two roles, these two schools of advertising do. This, as I just call them, showmanship and salesmanship. They've been there for 100, 150 years. And if you can't recognize these two schools of advertising when you see them, if you can't tell the difference, you can't really explain the kind of business effect that they create, because they create very different kinds of business effect, then how can you expect to judge, to brief, to sell in the work that you're creating? And that's really what the course is about. And it's about helping people towards creating better showmanship advertising, which is actually the advertising you've got to spend a bit more on, really, in budgetary terms, because it's the one that drives the growth, really, and the profit over time, reduces price sensitivity, all of those things. So it's a sort of, I hope it's something that the industry finds helpful and picks up. The feedback we've had has been fantastic. So
yeah, congratulations. I know,
thank you.
People are signing up left, right, and centre to get to come and do it.
Well,
just a quick pause to ask for your help. We received wonderful messages on how the podcast is supporting you as leaders and helping to normalise the challenges you face. To help us reach and support more leaders, we'd love your help. If you haven't already, please can you follow or subscribe on the platforms you watch or listen to us on, as it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. And now let's get back to the episode. Why did you think it was important, though, that we looked back in time?
Well, because when you get stuck in a rut, sometimes the only thing that can move you forward is looking back to the past to give you the energy and the inspiration to move you forward. So the Renaissance was all about that, rebirth. It was all about looking back at antiquity and reimagining the world today, and that it's so important. And actually, a lot of people who've been through the course say, honestly, the history was such an important part of this, and gives me the inspiration actually to do something myself. Do
you think it helps people connect with the purpose of why they're doing what they're doing?
Yes, I think it does. It helps to connect with a deeper purpose. I mean, we are an industry where as John, I did the course with Sir John Hegarty. He produced it, art directed it. He often says, if we were working in architecture, we'd know who Mies van der Rohe was, or Le Corbusier, or whoever else. But I often ask the question, anyone know who Rossa Reeves is? And no one seems to know, So I think we've got to know something about our history to be able to articulate what we do.
Yeah, no, I agree.
We're constantly being put in smaller and smaller boxes, with the colouring in department. We just create a bit of content. Well, that's not the right way to think about it. We drive growth, that's what marketing's about. That's what advertising helps to do. So we should be able to talk about what we do, articulate it
with pride,
and to tell people about it, because how do we operate if we don't?
Yeah. So it's curious. Questions popped into my head. Is when do you self-reflect to go, how much do you take time to look at your past to think about now, where do you want to go for the future?
Interesting question. I do, yeah. I think a lot about my life. the right hemisphere is much more autobiographical, connected with the body. You know, I studied, I did a master's in 17th century French literature. What I did was I looked at a scurrilous gossip monger who collected poems and stories over a period of about 50 years. And what you could tell is this change in culture in this very important century, and a change in him and a change in literary tastes, you know, across this manuscript over 50 years. And it turns out, of course, that's exactly what I've ended up doing in advertising with Lemon and Lookout, and looking at historical changes in culture and style of advertising, those two things, you know. So I think that it's fun. Nothing's ever wasted, is it?
No.
You know. So that I think is quite interesting. But yeah, I suppose I do look back at what I've done, and I think you've got to keep doing something new, haven't you? You've got to, and that's partly why I did partly why I did the course, in a sense, because it's a new challenge and it's a new thing. It's a new collaboration. It's a new way of talking about it in a different format, you know.
Was there any point that you doubted if you could do it?
Oh, goodness. Yes. I mean, it took about 2.5, 3 years to push it through. There's a wonderful, the Director General of the BBC, Hugh, what was he called? Hugh Weldon. Well, no, was that his name? Yes, I think it was. I saw him interviewed on camera, and he was talking about a colleague of his, and he was describing her as being, you know, wonderfully purposeful. And he described her as having a whim of iron. And I love that expression, to have a whim of iron. Because you've got to have a sort of notion, a fanciful notion in a sense, that's yours, you know. But you've got to have a will of iron to see it through, you know. And any creative endeavour requires that whim of iron. Because, you know, people will look at you, they'll challenge you, they'll say, well, I don't see why this...
Why are you doing that?
Why are you doing that? You know, can't you just keep on doing that?
Yeah.
You know, and why do you need, why, you know? And that's the thing, I think, with a creative project, it happens to you sometimes. That's how it feels to me anyway. You know, I was talking to Ian McGilchrist about it, and he said, you know, that's what happens in creativity. There's an intuition. It's like there's something there, but it's sort of a bit in a cloud. And it sort of draws you in. So you think, well, what does it actually look like, you know, and how might that work, you know? And then you gradually, from different places, you bring this thing together, this new thing together, and it emerges, you know. But it does, a creative project draws you in. It's not the other way round, you know. There's a word telos, I think, in Greek, which is about drive, you know, and you feel this drive towards
you need
something.
to do it.
You need to do it. You know, it happens to you in a way, and it can put you through all sorts of pain and discomfort and difficulty along the way, and you learn. You know, you sort of learn. This is just part of it. You know, we'll get through it. You know, but it is going to be painful, but you do, and you get there ultimately.
And then when you see the finished thing and you see the impact, that's right. When you can.
It's great.
That pain is then it all makes sense now.
Yeah,
and
it does.
You can celebrate, and it's
Yeah,
lovely.
It so you just got to keep going.
Got to keep going. I always just say it's one, like, I'll have, you know, this podcast has been a massive. I never thought I was going to be a podcast host, but there's days where you just go, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? How am I going to show up again? And it's just one foot in front of the other.
That's it.
It will be okay. Trust yourself, step by step, and keep calming. You know, I wake up every morning, and before I get out of bed, it's like, today's going to be a good day. Go, you're going to handle this. It's going to be fine. This is going to be great. Look, and I just program my brain every morning before I get out of bed to work for me and help me just to keep showing
rather
up.
Than against you.
Yeah, because it's so easy to wake up and go, this is going to be so hard. It's going to be so tough. How am I going to do it? Oh my God, I've got a phone call with so-and-so. And it's like, no. That's not going to help. No. Actually coach my brain. And also, I don't know about you, I kind of go, my mind isn't me. It's a tool I have in my brain. I'm me. That's right. So I can actually program my mind.
That's interesting.
So if I talk to my mind in a really positive, kind, directional way, I think like a sat-nav, it's going to then take me to the right place. Yeah. If I program it into a dead end, we're going to a dead end.
That's a nice way to think about it. In fact, Birnbach said something similar. You know, he said You know, we are, you know, the human being is a creature of nature, and we're, you know, we have motivations and instincts, but the mind is a tool that helps us to, you know, to get there, you know, but ultimately there are deeper things going on that drive us, you know, and so program your mind. Exactly.
It's exciting. Take some control back. See,
Yeah,
I like my left brain just likes the control back to left.
The control, yeah.
But I love to know, you know, wonderful what you do. And I love hearing how you do look after your left and right brain with your creativity. But you can also go to the numbers if you need to. What advice have you looked at younger Orlando? What advice would you?
You know what? I think younger Orlando could probably tell me a few things. Yeah, I think be yourself, only more so is one thing I would say. You know, there's always as it goes back to projecting a personality, doesn't it? You know, and you know, I think I was a bit unusual at school, you know, in some ways, and you learn a lot from that. Actually, you know, you learn how that sometimes it's a great way to get through things is to be slightly different, to be unusual, to be that people, you know, sort of respect you for that difference, you know. And I think it's important to be a little bit provocative. Sometimes that's something, you know, you've got to be a bit comfortable with. And I think you just go with your instincts, I would say. You know, I'm not perhaps unlike you, Joe, I don't plan my life out, you know, in day by day. But I just sort of, if you go with the flow and you work out what's interesting to you, and there's something over here, well, that's interesting over there, and that's happening there. Gradually, you know, things happen.
Yeah.
And as, you know, Sir John often says, do interesting things and interesting things will happen to you. And I think that is so true.
Yeah. Trust it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Is there anything else we've missed or you'd like to share before we close?
No, do you know what? I don't think I think we've covered pretty much all of it.
I think we got through a lot there, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Both sides of my brain's very happy.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad. Even the right one. That's good.
It was an absolute pleasure talking with you, and congratulations on the book. And you know, the course is absolutely fantastic. And can people sign up at the moment?
Yes, there's. I'm not sure when this goes out, but yes, they can. We'll get in touch. We'll
even if that cohort's done, they can get maybe into the next one.
Exactly.
Yes, but do look it up. Yes. It's definitely worth everyone doing.
Advertising Principles Explained.
There you go. We'll put the link in the show notes so people can get to it. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Jo.
It's been a pleasure. Absolutely. And thank you for everyone watching, or if you're listening. We'll see you next week. If you've been loving our Courageous Leaders podcast, please can I ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps keep the quality content coming and reach listeners like you that we can then really, really help. We fund this podcast ourselves, so to have your support means that we can keep delivering week on week. Thank you.